After the United States officially broke away from the British Empire in 1776, its merchant ships were no longer under the protection of the British Navy. Over time, the Barbary pirate states of North Africa started exploiting this by capturing American merchant vessels, enslaving their crews, and forcing the United States to pay tribute. The Barbary corsairs were pirates who primarily base themselves out of the ports of Tunis, Tripoli, and Algiers. While these corsairs were based out of North Africa, they raided West Africa, Brazil, Ireland, Western Britain, and even all the way to northern Iceland, while other European powers found it easier to pay the pirates a preventative tribute than to go to war with them. The United States simply could not afford this tribute. The Barbary states were nominally part of the Ottoman Empire, but in practice operated independently of the government. In Istanbul in 1985, the US disbanded its continental navy and thus left its civilians unprotected in the Mediterranean Ocean in July of 1785. Two American ships, the Cher Maria and the Dolphin, were captured by Algerian pirates who forced the survivors into slavery and set their ransom at $60,000. Thomas Jefferson, then the minister to France, attempted to form a coalition of other European naval powers to defeat Algiers, but this attempt ended in failure, so the United States eventually paid $40,000 to free the enslaved merchants. In 1791 and 1795, the US sent diplomats to North Africa and successfully built treaties with Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli. However, by 1797, the United States had paid $1 million in tribute, or about a fifth of the annual federal budget, and by 1799 the U.S. was behind on payments to the Barbary states by around $300,000. The American people were heavily against these tributes, as they thought the money would be better used to build a navy to defend their merchant vessels from the Barbary pirates, and the American people made their voices heard in the 1801 election as they voted for Thomas Jefferson over the incumbent John Adams, partly because Jefferson campaigned against the humiliation of paying tribute to the petty tyrant of Algiers. But now that Jefferson was in office, he had to make good on his promises, citing that the United States was behind on his tributary payments. The Pasha of Tripoli, Yusuf Conley, increased the expected tribute from the United States, but Thomas Jefferson, opposed to paying any tribute at all, decided to face the Barbary corsair militarily. So, on May 13, 1801, President Thomas Jefferson ordered a squadron led by Commodore Richard Dale to blockade the port of Tripoli and attack any interfering Barbary ship. On August 1, 1801, the USS Enterprise, commanded by Lieutenant Andrew Starrett, encountered a Tripolitan ship while en route to Malta for a water resupply and approached the Enterprise. At the time was flying British colours to go undetected. Captain Saint of the Enterprise interrogated the commander of the Tripolitan ship on the object of its cruise, to which he replied that he had came out to cruise after the Americans, and that he lamented that he had not come into contact with them. At that exact moment, Captain Sarah discharged a volley of musketry, to which the Tripolitan returned fire. The Tripolitan cruiser attempted to board the Enterprise 3 times, but was repulsed every single time. The Tripolitan cruiser also surrendered by striking its colors 3 times, to which it resumed battle. Each time after the third feigned surrender, Captain Stead gave orders to sink the Tripolitan. During this onslaught, the Tripolitan was gravely damaged, and when the Tripolitan finally begged for mercy, Captain Saint decided to show clemency to his enemies. Of the 80 men on board the Tripolitan ship, 20 were killed and 30 were injured. Well, not a single soldier or the Enterprise was wounded. This American victory was so astounding that it gave America a strong resolve to completely defeat the Barbary states. On October 31, 1803, off the coast of Tripoli, the USS Philadelphia, accompanied by the USS Vixen, was chasing down a Tripolitan naval ship. However, the Americans were unfamiliar with the terrain, and the USS Philadelphia ran ground on an uncharted reef. Captain William Banbridge tried to refloat the vessel, but strong winds and rising waves drove the Philadelphia further AG ground. With no other options, and in the best interest of his men, Captain Banbridge surrendered to the Tripolitan Captain William Banbridge, and his entire crew were enslaved by the Pasha of Tripoli as war captives. This defeat was disastrous to the war effort, as the vessel was potentially usable by the state of Tripoli at the harbor of Tripoli. The Barbary corsair had finally managed to refloat the USS Philadelphia on November 2nd of 1803. However, the Bey of Tripoli decided he had too few soldiers to man the Philadelphia. The US believed that the Philadelphia was a prize too great to fall into enemy hands, so they devised a plan to either recapture or destroy it. On February 16, 1804, under the cover of nightfall, a young Lieutenant Stephen Decour sailed the Intrepid into Tripoli harbor with 83 men under the guise that the ship had lost all of its anchors in a storm and needed safe harbor. Decatur tied the Intrepid next to the Philadelphia, and the Americans boarded the captured ship after making sure it wasn't seaworthy. Decour's men set the USS Philadelphia ablaze while executing this plan. Decour's force came under fire from a garrison that was set to defend the Philadelphia, but escaped. The American raiding party only suffered one wounded soldier and inflicted more than 20 casualties on Tripoli. On August 3, 1804, Commodore Edward Preble commanded his Mediterranean squadron to launch the first of a series of bombardments on the harbor of Tripoli with the goal of destroying the defending batteries and sinking enemy ships. Preble dispatched 6 gunboats under the command of Stephen D.C. to engage Tripp's smaller vessels in the shallow coastal waters. Preble also deployed 2 bomb catchers to blast the capital city. The Tripolitan had formed a flotilla of gunboats and smaller vessels during the battle. Stephen Deere moved to board and capture a Tripolitan gunboat, and in a heavy battle he was able to subdue the crew after the captured Deere was notified that his brother James Deere had been killed in battle. Furiously, Deore chased down the enemy ship and engaged it. Although his crew was badly injured and fighting at a 2-to-1 disadvantage, Decatur claimed his second victory of the day after a bloody engagement. However, Decour's successes did little to turn the tide of the battle, as the 2 catches did minimal damage to the city. On September 1, 1804, the USS Intrepid was fitted as a floating volcano and would be sent towards the corsair fleet and the walls of Tripoli to detonate in a massive explosion. Lieutenant Richard Summers assumed command of the Intrepid and enlisted 12 volunteers at 8 p.m. The Intrepid began its final voyage, joining it with the USS Argus Vixen and Nautilus, serving as escorts to pick up the returning crew from their mission. As the Intrepid approached Tripoli, it was spotted and fired upon by Cades from the overlooking shore batteries, and shortly after the trade erupted in a massive explosion, killing everyone on board. The aiding vessels, not knowing that it had exploded early, remained at sea all night. Waiting for the volunteers to return, it became apparent to Commodore Preble that besieging Tripoli was becoming too deadly and costly, so he decided to look for another strategy. The leader of Tripoli, Pasha Y.F. Conley, held a strong grip over Tripoli, but to become leader of Tripoli, Y.F. Conley deposed his brother Hampt Conley, who was then exiled to Alexandria. William Eaton, who had returned to the Mediterranean Sea as the naval agent to the Barbary states, had been granted permission from the American government and Thomas Jefferson to back Hampt Conley as the rightful heir to the throne of Tripoli. Eaton sailed to Alexandria and gave his proposal to Hampt, who accepted. Eaton was given a small detachment of 7 Marines commanded by Lieutenant Presley. Owanan Hampt Conley and William Eaton recruited 400 Greek and Arab mercenaries who would join the fight against Tripoli. Eaton would receive naval support on his march from the U.S. Mediterranean Squadron, including the USS Nautilus Hornet and Argus. On March 8, 1805, Eaton led his forces on a 500 meters forest march westward across the Libyan desert from Alexandria. Their objective was to capture the city of DNA. Internal cohesion was extremely low in this army, as the Ottoman Muslims and Greek Christians had many quarrels on their track. Along the march, Eaton dealt with many attempted mutinies, but was able to quell the majority of them. Eaton finally arrived near DNA in late April of 1804, and devised his plan for the invasion of DNA on the morning of April 26, 1805. Ian sent a letter to Mustafa Bey, the Ottoman governor of Dur, to ask for safe passage and supplies. However, he knew the proposal would probably be rejected. Mustafa Bey replied, "My head or yours." On April 27th, the USS Argus sent a cannon to Eden's unit for the attack. The Mediterranean squadron then bombarded DNA. For approximately 1 hour during this bombardment, Eden divided his force into 2 units. Hamid Conley would lead the Arab mercenaries southwest to cut off the road to Tripoli. Then they would attack the city's left flank and storm the weakly defended governor's palace Eden with the rest of his mercenaries, and Marines would attack the harbour fortress. The attack began at 2:45 p.m. With Lieutenant Owanon leading the advance. The harbour defences were heavily reinforced and temporarily halted the attackers. However, the Arab mercenaries were able to enter unopposed in the western section of the city. Eden's unit became hesitant under fire, so he decided the only way to regain the initiative was to charge while leading the charge. Eden was shot in the wrist, and seriously injured but charged on regardless. The Mediterranean squadron halted their bombardment to allow Eden's force to continue Owanon with his marines, and Greek mercenaries took the harbour fortress shortly after Obanon, then raised the American flag over the fortress, marking the first time the American flag was raised on foreign soil. Many defend ERS of the city, sandwiched between Hamid's force, was swiftly crushed by 400 p.m. The fortress of DNA had fallen to America. The US suffered 2 casualties and 3 injuries to its marine detachment, and 9 Greek mercenaries were also killed. Arab mercenary attackers and Traylon defender casualties remain unknown in Tripoli. Yusuf Conley was aware that the city had fallen and had sent reinforcements to try to recapture the stronghold. The reinforced detachment stationed themselves south of DNA on May 13th. Tripolitan reinforcements ferociously attacked the city and drove Hamid Karaman's Arab forces to a breaking point, almost recapturing the governor's palace. However, the USS Argus and Eton's captured batteries decimated the attackers, who finally broke, securing DNA under American control. After DNA, Eden planned to march on Tripoli in the following months. While he was en route, he was informed of the treaty signed between Tobias Lear of the US and Yusuf Conley, which brought an end to hostilities. America agreed to pay a final ransom of $60,000 for the 297 enslaved sailors of the USS Philadelphia, and in exchange 89 Tripolitan prisoners held by the US were released. The treaty explicitly said America would have to pay no further tribute. America also agreed to lift its Dil blockade of Tripoli, ending the 4 Years' War, although America neutralized Tripolitania. The Second Barbary War begins. Regency of Alars continued to extract tributary payments from America, and it remained a powerful piracy state during the following years, but the new day of Al-Azali rejected an American tributary payment as insufficient and declared war. A few weeks later, Algerian Corsair captured an American merchant ship. This Algerian attack was designed by the British Empire and Allies to coincide with the beginning of the War of 1812 between America and the British Empire. This allowed Allies to attack American merchant ships unpunished as the British raised a blockade of the Atlantic Ocean, and America was occupied fighting Britain when the War of 1812 concluded. In 1815, President James Madison asked Congress to declare war on Algiers. Congress did not officially declare war on Algiers, but did grant the use of the U.S. Navy to protect American interests and seize Algerian assets. In May of 1815, Commodore Stephen Deere led a 10-ship squadron to Algiers, with an even larger force to follow. Deere reached the Strait of Gibraltar on June 15, 1815, and after learning that several Algerine cruisers had crossed the Strait of Gibraltar a few days before he did, Decour decided to give chase and cut them off before they reached Algiers. Deere encountered the 46-gun Mashuda captained by Admiral Riz Hamdou of Cape Gata, Spain. The Americans heavily outnumbered the Alerin 9 ships to 1, so Hamdou tried to flee to the port of Algiers, but was quickly overtaken by the Americans, noticing that his options were limited. Hamdu next tried to sail to a neutral Spanish port along the coast. The USS Constellation and Ontario were able to close in and blast the Algerine flagship. The Alerin were forced to resort to musket fire at such close range. At the same time, Commodore Decour positioned his flagship, the Greer, broadside to the Muda and launched a devastating blast, crippling the Muda and killing Hamdu in the onslaught. After this, Decour expected the Alerin to surrender. But instead, the remaining men continued hopelessly firing muskets until the USS Ypres fired more broadsides at the Muda, forcing an Alerin surrender during the battle. The Americans suffered 10 casualties with 30 wounded, while the Alerin suffered 30 casualties with 46 prisoners. 2 days later, Diaz sighted the Algerine ship EST Stadio and chased it into Shaw waters off Cape Palos. Fearing his vessels would run ground, Decatur sent his smaller vessels, the USS Epivere Spark Torch and Spitfire, to deal with the enemy, and after a fierce 2-hour firefight, the Alerin began abandoning their sinking vessel and fleeing towards the shore. The 4 American vessels fired and sunk the escaping boats, forcing the surrender of the remaining crew. Fresh off 2 massive victories, Decatur sailed triumphantly into the port of Algiers and forced de Omar AA into terms in the treaty with Algiers. America would cease paying tribute to Algiers under all circumstances. All American prisoners held by Algiers were freed without ransom. De Omar agreed to pay $10,000 as compensation for stolen property during previous conflicts. It was after these 2 wars that America had proved that the Berber states could be easily dealt with by European navies. The Regency of Algiers declined in power and influence until 1830, when Algiers was invaded and colonized by France. America's victories in the Barbary Wars proved to the world that America could defend its sovereignty and assets around the world.